Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him two lips like roses and clover, and tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone, don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is Robert Phoenix. Robert has been studying the esoteric arts for over 30 years. As a student of the late Karen Lundegaard, he became a professional psychic and was part of one of the first psychic phone networks in the world. After conquering the offline world, he moved his focus to the web. In 2008, he started robertphoenix.com, where he decodes and unpacks contemporary culture through the use of his intuitive gifts, tarot, and astrology. Aside from being a world-renowned astrologer, Robert also hosts a daily show called 15 Minutes of Flame and the Friday FARCast. In his show, Robert provides a special blend of news, astrology, commentary, and esoteric correlations that reveal to you the true nature of your reality. Robert is a writer, teacher, radio host, astrologer, social reverse engineer, and was once even called the Anthony Bourdain of astrology. Robert, welcome to Nox Mente.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. I'm not sure how I feel about the Anthony Bourdain comparison these days.
It was on your website.
I know it's true. But it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, welcome, Robert.
Thanks
We're excited to have you on.
Thanks, Nish.
So let's just dive right in. Tell us about the world you grew up in, the landscape, so that we can get an idea of your set of symbols as we move into the dream language.
So I grew up originally. I was born in France, and at a young age moved to the United States, and grew up for the first 4 years of my life in New Jersey, where I actually had quite a vivid dream life in many regards. I actually remember key dreams from when I was a child, and not just dreams, but almost like nocturnal prompts in some ways.
Oh, wow.
I remember one night I was, I think I was around 3 years old, and I climbed out of my crib or bed or whatever it was I was sleeping in. We lived in an apartment. It was very small. And I got up in the middle of the night and I went into the living room and I turned on the TV. This must have been probably around 11:30 or 12. And I began to watch The Tonight Show. And I believe at that time, Jack Parr was the host of The Tonight Show. And I'll never forget, it was the guests on The Tonight Show were Michael Landon and Dan Blocker, whom I later would recognize as being cast members of the show Bonanza.
Yes.
And I always thought that this moment in time was kind of significant for me in some ways, because later in my life, when I would move to California in my teen years, early teen and mid-teen years, I was obsessed with late night television, and specifically Johnny Carson and Tom Snyder on The Tomorrow Show. So I spent a lot of nocturnal hours spending time in that world, and it all started when I was about 3 years old. That was an interesting kind of moment in time. And then I'll never forget another dream I had. It sounds quite mundane, but I remember I used to tell these really bad jokes all the time. And I was around 3 years old, and my father got sick of them. And he decided he was going to teach me how the alphabet, how to spell dog and cat, and some basic arithmetic. So I struggled with the alphabet. And I remember one night I had a dream and I saw the alphabet clearly. It was just like on a chalkboard.
Oh, wow.
And then I saw dog, D-O-G, and then there was a chalk picture of a dog, cat, C-A-T, chalk picture of a cat, and then 1 + 1 was 2, 2 + 2 was 4. So I grabbed that, and from that point forward, I nailed the alphabet, and I got to tell my stupid jokes again. I don't know, but That's how, sort of my early remembrances of kind of nocturnal promptings and sort of, basic fundamental dreams. And then I moved to California when I was about 5 years old, I think. And I grew up just south of the Summer of Love. So this was 1965, 66, 67. And we lived in a town called San Bruno, which was roughly about 10 miles away from San Francisco. And it was an interesting place to be in an interesting time because you could feel it in the air. I mean, it was almost like perfume.
Oh, nice.
It was intoxicating, really. I mean, psychedelic art was everywhere. Paisley was everywhere. Peace signs were everywhere.
How old were you at this point?
I was between 5 and 7 and 8.
So these are vivid memories.
Oh yeah, totally. You get up on Saturday morning and you'd flip on Saturday morning TV and there'd be the Monkees and you'd have Bob Rafelson and Jack Nicholson selling their version of the Beatles to America. And it was a really interesting time to sort of be alive, especially that close to San Francisco. And I absolutely loved the music. The music was really intoxicating. And I remember my father had received a record from one of our neighbors as a gift. And it was this group called the Neighborhood Children. And it was some kind of, third-rate psychedelic group, I think from San Francisco. And I used to play this record over and over again. And I would dance into kind of a frenzy with this record. Like I would take my shirt off in the living room of my parents' apartment.
Finding that ecstasis.
Oh my God, it was incredible. I found this kind of thing that got unlocked inside of me with this music. So I loved the music. It was great. But I didn't really dig hippies, which was an interesting kind of contrast. I remember we went to Haight-Ashbury when I was probably around 7 years old. And I was really, the spy thing was really big back then too. James Bond.
Oh yeah, Get Smart and all that.
Get Smart, Man from U.N.C.L.E. I mean, everything was spy. So I had a spy kit. And so my grandparents were in town, and my parents said, "Well, let's go to San Francisco." So we decided to drive to the Haight-Ashbury. So, and this is 1967. So the Summer of Love is a 24/7 theater, and I remember packing my spy kit so I could deal with the hippies if I had to. I had my little spy gun.
You were prepared.
Yeah, I was prepared. And then we drove into Haight-Ashbury, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was, it was like this carnival, this human carnival, and people were dancing and hanging off of street signs. And
oh, wow.
It was really something. I'd never been to India before. I've never been to India since, but it felt like it, in my own way, it kind of felt like that. So I grew. Those were my formative years in Northern California as a child, and I was kind of a wild child. I wound up being the kid that other parents didn't let their kids hang out with.
Oh yes, I was that kid too.
Yeah. I got into trouble, and it was kind of an intense phase. We were a young family, and my parents had a lot of stuff to work through, So we're all working through our stuff together. And then we moved to San Jose, and that was a totally different world. It was way more kind of ethnically mixed and diverse. And I was living in kind of a lily white wonderland south of San Francisco. And in San Jose, I started to hang out with Mexican kids and black kids and Asian kids, and I got into my first fight with a black kid in San Jose, and it was interesting. We fought it out, and we got sent to the principal's office, and then we talked, and we shook hands, and we became best friends. So that was kind of
I love how that can work out.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically, men are like dogs, to be honest with you. If you ever see a dog in like a dog park, and they kind of get on each other's case, and they sort of like tumble for a little bit, and they rustle up and then they're done.
Yeah, then they sort it and it's all good.
Yeah, you never see dogs really go back and like, I'm going to get that dog.
Right. And move on. Now we've got their scent. We know where we stand.
Yeah, exactly. They don't hold grudges. They just move on. And so we need to be more like dogs, I think.
Oh, I agree. It'd be a better place.
That was my life. And I moved around quite a bit for a couple of years, and eventually, rotated back to San Jose, where I spent most of my high school years. And so I had a lot of dream activity when I was young and living in San Jose.
Were you a banana slug?
What's that?
Were you a banana slug?
Was I a banana slug? No, I was not a banana slug. I'm not sure, probably more of a cricket, I'd say. Crickets were fascinating.
No, isn't that the high school team of Santa Cruz, the banana slugs?
Oh, no. Those are the banana slugs. No, that was, in high school, I was
they're college
Pirates.
Pirates, okay. That's I thought it was college. No, my bad.
Yeah, no, college, I was a Gator. I was a Gator. San Francisco, get a Gator.
Right.
Yeah.
So that it's great that you had San Francisco at that period of time in these early formative years. I mean, how amazing that is to build a foundation from.
Oh, it was really interesting. Like my father used to take me to this place called Playland, which no longer exists, and it was an amusement park at the edge of San Francisco, on the ocean. Near the Sutro Baths, the old Sutro Baths.
Mm-hmm.
And Playland was like really seedy.
Yeah.
But by this point in time, it was hard,
I think that's a common thing for all playlands across the whole entire states, because ours was seedy in Chicago too. It was creepy.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like these disincarnate spirits begin to kind of occupy that space.
Yes, that is something to ruminate on.
It's the ghost of old carnies.
Yeah.
Were you religious at all?
What's that? I'm sorry?
Were you born into like a religion at all?
No, I wasn't. And I had some very interesting experiences with religion early on, which are not your textbook experiences. Like when I was, I think probably around 3 or 4, my mother took me to church, Episcopalian church. And it's my first time, and we walked up to the church, and the doors fly open, and man, the organ is pumping, and the stained glass window is right behind the organ, and the lights flooding the stained glass window. And man, I freaked out. I totally freaked out, and I threw such a fit or a tantrum that they wouldn't allow me in the church. So they put me downstairs and did the Sunday school thing with Sunday school kids, and I remember just passing time and trying to play or whatever. But that was kind of a theme for me that would get acted out sort of in the later years. When we lived in San Bruno, we bought a house in San Jose in 1968, so I was still technically going to school about 10 miles away from San Francisco. And then we would drive after school to go to our house in San Jose, which was about 35, 40 miles away. And some days we would take El Camino, which is a lot of stoplights because the freeway would be really crowded. And we would come up on this Russian Orthodox church, which was white, alabaster white and cobalt blue minarets and everything. And I would have a massive anxiety attack when we would approach this church. And I would climb under the back seat of the car because I was so freaked out. And it was like a serious panic attack.
And you were 3 or what?
No, I was 8 at this time.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was like seriously freaked out by this church. And I would pass it. And then they would say, yeah, we're past it. And all of a sudden I would regain some semblance of control. But this church like would throw me into a very, very weird place.
That's incredible, really.
Yeah.
That you had such a visceral response to it.
Yeah, and I had like weird stuff with religion. Like when I was a kid, like I had like, back in the day, you guys may remember this, but sometimes and like I couldn't look at Jesus while I ate. It was really, really weird.
The guilt was it? What do you think?
I don't know. I was like this really young heretical person in a lot of ways, I thought. So I don't, I've got ideas about why.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, which interesting enough, have been revealed to me in dream states. But I did not vibe at all with that church. It freaked me out to the point where I would panic.
That's interesting. What do you have? Are you religious or spiritual now?
Yeah, I mean, so I know a life where I've had divine intervention. Like when I was 18 months old, I had spinal meningitis, and it was there. Apparently, there are like two main strains of spinal meningitis. One, which is not as deadly, but if you recover, there's a good chance you'll have brain damage. And then the other, which is deadlier, but if you recover, the chances are, you'll be intact. So when I was 18 months old, I was basically on death's doorstep.
Wow.
And I was baptized and given my last rites simultaneously.
So you were emotionally in this state too, thinking you were going to pass.
I didn't know. I was only 18 months old.
Oh man, I thought you said 18 years. 18 months. Okay.
No, I had no idea, really.
Okay.
So I was baptized and given my last rites simultaneously.
Wow, that's intriguing.
Yeah, and the minister, the pastor, basically said, you better pray. This is based on what they were, hearing from the doctor, that it was not looking great. And then the next day, after a night of prayer, I was standing up inside my oxygen tent trying to get the IV out of my ankle. So I'm convinced that something miraculous happened then. And I also had another experience when I was 21, where I guess you could call it kind of a conversion experience. It was very powerful and very profound for me. But I didn't go to church though. I've never been a church person.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really, I don't vibe with church.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had some very profound, quasi-religious and certainly spiritual experiences. And I would say, I guess, I'd be more spiritual than not, or
Okay.
more than religious. Yeah.
Well, all right. Thank you. And also in this kind of opening stuff, since you are a great astrologer, we always ask the sign. So if you could give us a little, Robert, overview of your rising and moon, what house your sun is in.
Yeah. So do you know much about astrology?
I know a little bit.
Okay. So I am a Scorpio rising, 28 degrees. So I'm right at the end of Scorpio.
Ooh.
And that makes my first house mostly Sagittarius. And I have Jupiter and Sag in my first house.
Oh, I love that.
And my sun is Virgo at 29 degrees.
So you're at the end.
I'm at the end. If I'd been born a half an hour later, I'd be 0 Libra.
The Sag energy, I must confess, is my favorite for teachers that have been in my personal life. Everyone I've loved and actually learned the most from have been Sag afflicted, one way or another.
Yeah, it seems to be part of the sign.
Yeah,
and
the higher learning.
Yeah, so I've got Jupiter and Sag in my first house, so I've got to get it out somehow. And then my moon is in Libra. I have a Libra moon.
Nice.
And it's conjunct Mercury, so I have a Moon-Mercury conjunction.
Oh, interesting. And so this is a little off, but I want to ask, since I have you here, I have been following your 11th house series. So what is it about the 11th house and you naming that little series that?
You mean over on Gaia?
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
so
I get it on YouTube, on your channel.
So Jay Widener asked me to come up with a name. And I thought, well, the 11th house is about groups. It's ruled by Aquarius. It's also, for me, the 11th house has taken on the energy of the internet, social networks.
Yep.
So I just put it all together and it just made sense to the 11th house.
Okay. Yeah, I figured that it was that clear cut, but I was just curious.
Oh, that's great.
I've got
4 planets in the 11th house.
I don't want to veer too much off of the thing, but that I had, since you're Robert Phoenix, I had to get a little bit of that in.
Yeah,
Have
sure.
you this is a question, since this show basically deals with altered states of consciousness, dreaming, memories, past lives, through dreams or near deaths, out of body, all that. Have you ever done any psychedelics?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And so we love that. And could you, if you're comfortable, could you give us a little walk us through maybe a couple of significant experiences that changed your view of states of consciousness?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think the first really powerful state of consciousness change I experienced was at about 9 years old. And I was they had these department stores called Mervyn's in California.
I remember Mervyn's.
And I was in the soft goods aisle, and I remember a woman dropping a pair of either underwear or T-shirts out of the soft goods aisle. And as soon as that began to fall off of the rack, I knew what was going to happen exactly.
Oh, wow.
over the course of like the next 10 seconds. And it was a really weird thing for me to experience.
And you were 9?
Yeah, I was 9 years old.
Wow.
So it was I didn't know how to, explain that to my parents, but it was unusual, And so that was really like sort of the first unusual kind of phenomena with like time and deja vu and things like that.
So
Yes.
would you call that remote viewing?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and subsequently after that, I used to have them quite a bit. It was not uncommon for me to experience those. But I would say, outside of spinning like crazy, like what most kids do.
Yes, I used to love that.
Yeah, totally. The first time I really, I suppose, altered my consciousness was about 12 years old, where I drank about 18 beers in one day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a hot summer day, and we tapped my friend's father's keg. And
Bad kids.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I remember that day as being a lot of fun. And then I when I was a freshman in high school, we used to have this thing called double session because our school was so crowded. And so we would have, as a freshman, we wouldn't go to school till about 12:15. And then we would get out at around 5:45. And you just don't want to give freshmen in high school, 5 hours during the day, unsupervised. That's not a good idea. So I used to get drunk with people in the neighborhood. Not every day, but it would happen. And I'd wind up going to school just completely shit-faced. And during that time, when you're young and your liver is fresh and everything,
Yeah.
getting drunk is like, it's almost psychedelic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that lasted for a while. And then the next year, I had to get up to school early, so the morning hijinks stopped. And I started, I had a kind of a straight and narrow year that year. But it was in that summer after my sophomore year in high school that I discovered marijuana. And it was back in the day when it was like Mexican ragweed, which was incredible. It wasn't like heavy or anything. It was light and playful and funny, and you laughed and ate donuts. And I thought, man, this is great. I
miss ditchweed, which is, I think, what we called it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like this, kind of mind fuck drug. It's just weird.
It's way different. Way different.
Yeah, it was Cheech and Chong-y.
I know.
So I did that, and I thought, wow, gee, what else is out there? And astrologically, this is beginning to correspond with Neptune transiting my first house, if you know anything about astrology.
Oh, yeah. Oh, cool.
In Sagittarius, right?
Did you have your
open the doors?
Did you have your second Saturn return yet?
Oh, no, that's much later. No,
at
this time I'm around
56.
15 years old.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
No, I meant now, as of today, I meant yet. Since
today, no. So my Saturn
2 more years, right?
Back in December.
Okay.
When it goes into Capricorn. And I was a big fan. To me, music was really psychedelic. Music for me, even before I discovered any mind-altering substances, was really like my drug.
Mm-hmm.
I would sit around, and I know it sounds really corny, but I'd sit around in a darkened room and lights off and, on my waterbed or whatever, and I'd listen to Yes.
Yeah.
And I would just trip on Yes, or I'd trip on Genesis. And
well, you had that Neptune energy coming in, right?
Oh, it's
at that time? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So music was really a vehicle for me to go places.
Yeah.
Early Genesis was so groundbreaking and unique compared to even like Yes or Pink Floyd at that time. Like I remember when Selling England by the Pound came out. That was a great album.
Selling England by the Pound and Foxtrot, man.
Foxtrot, yeah.
I used to listen to Foxtrot start to finish. That was back in the days of 8-track tapes. So it would just loop, just keep playing and playing and playing. And Watcher of the Skies for me was like, that was my song, It was great.
I liked it. I was, Cinema Show was mine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, after I started smoking cannabis, I'm like, well, what else is out there? And so I figured out, where to get LSD. And I took my first trip when I was 15 years old, and it freaked the living shit out of me. Like I was seriously like spooked. And
so was it bad?
Oh, I had a total bad trip.
Oh, interesting.
Totally bad trip. And the reason why is I took it and I went to bed. And so I laid in my bed, tripping my brains out, right? And I was like so freaked out in some ways that I was thinking of going into my parents' bedroom and telling them, look, I'm just taking LSD and I'm losing my shit, So, but I didn't do that. I kind of soldiered through, right? But I thought to myself, I got to try this again.
Mm-hmm.
I got to try this again. I've got to try it under different circumstances. So I did, and it was much different. I took it with some friends, and we went out, and we kind of had this merry prankster kind of night, and it was mind blowing. And I had never laughed so hard, and it was incredible. And so at that point, I became I wouldn't say addicted, but I loved psychedelics.
Was there a point when you used them to possibly explore gates of perception outside of, say, being social and the fun, joyous part that is also part of it?
Well, I would say I don't think you could get out of that component of it. It happens along the way. Like, did I sit there and meditate and go deeply into the psychedelic realm? I would say, by and large, the answer would be no. but I would certainly have epiphanies, and I'd certainly have visions that I could not bring back with me.
Yeah.
But it was, for me, it was almost like, how do I say this? It was almost like trying to see what I could do under the kind of the wave of psychedelia. It was almost like it was a challenge in some ways, like driving a car, driving a car across town, go to a movie.
But also an exploration at the same time.
Yeah.
Of that
truly.
realm, that whatever.
Right.
I had friends that could function like that, drive cars, but I would be pushing into like matter, like a wall, and I would start blending in. I was never able to function.
Yeah, no, I was kind of like a psychedelic ranger.
You sound like it.
That was my thing. And I remember one night we were driving across town to go see, 200 Motels, the Frank Zappa movie. Is it 500 Motels or 200 Motels? Frank Zappa film. Anyway, we were driving across town to go see the Zappa film. And every headlight is like the birth of creation.
Wow.
Like universes are just exploding off headlights.
Yeah, lights are amazing.
And it's like, how do I navigate through this? How can I, get into the phenomenon, but at the same time, hold my shit together? That was really always the thing, And so I did that quite a bit in high school. That was my drug du jour in a lot of ways. And then I discovered mushrooms when I left high school, and those were just incredible.
Yeah.
So warm, so organic.
Yeah, way different.
Oh yeah, it was like the mushrooms became friends. It was like hanging out with friends.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a consciousness there actually. It feels that way.
Yeah, totally. And so my psychedelic exploration on that level continued up through my my early 20s, both with LSD and mushrooms. And I would say that a real major turning point for me actually happened while I was tripping. And I think at that time I was 21. This goes back to the conversion experience that I was talking about earlier. And I was at that time, I was 20, and my girlfriend was a year older than me. She was 21. She was working at PG&E. She'd graduated from college before me. So she was like established and setting up in the world, and, and I was still in school. And so she was, kind of moving ahead very quickly. And one night it was on a Friday night, and I got really, really drunk with some friends. And at about 3 a.m, decided to get my car and go pay my girlfriend a visit, which was probably not a very good idea.
Oh dear.
And I wound up passing out at the wheel of my car. And my car drifted. This is on the freeway right around near where Candlestick Park is.
Wow.
And so it's about 3 a.m. There's nobody on the freeway. Now there would be in that area, but not back then. So I passed out, and my car drifts, and all of a sudden I bounce off the center divider. And luckily, I just lose my side mirror, and I kind of have this dent in my car, wakes me up, and I, soldier on, and I get to her place. So I knock on her door, and she lets me in, and it's her big birthday weekend, and her sister was sleeping with her, and she had to get out of the bed, and so I basically disturbed everybody's shit. And I lay down, woke up the next day, and people were her brother lived there, his fiance was there, sister was there. They weren't that happy with me. And so I take off, and make a bunch of music, mixtapes, for the party that's that night. And that night I take some acid. And it's all really good until my girlfriend tells me, I almost broke up with you today. And, instead of saying, oh, gee, great, and I'm glad you didn't do that, I'm happy we're together, it tweaked this thing in me where all of a sudden I became really insecure, right? It was almost like this connection between my mother was being threatened, right? in that moment, she was my mother. And so this psychic umbilicus was being threatened. And I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. So the psychedelics really amplified and accelerated everything. And I remember just wanting everybody from the party to leave.
Yeah.
And within 10 minutes, they were gone.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, I moved these people out of this party. Mm-hmm. So now I'm thinking I'm alone with her. I can talk to her. We can have a rational conversation. And we can stay together. Well, it didn't work out that way. And I wound up eventually going to sleep, or at least going to bed at around 3:30, 4 in the morning. And I was having like dark night of the soul. And I was completely devoid of any light inside of myself. And I began to see my life get played out almost like, like a Bardo, like a past life, or not past life, but a near-death experience. And I was watching my life and what a sham my life was, and how false it was, and how I wasn't even like touching into any of my potential. And I couldn't sleep. I just could not get to sleep. And I was trying to wake her up so she would hug me because I was freaking out. And it didn't work, And later on, it was like the parable of, Christ in Gethsemane, and he's trying to wake the disciples, and nobody will wake up because he's freaked out, scared, whatever. To me, it was kind of like that. And so I prayed and I said, hey, look, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I need to sleep. I need peace. And within 10 minutes, I was asleep. And I woke up the next day and I knew my life had changed. I didn't know why or how, but I knew it changed. I kind of knew the why, but I didn't know how it was going to change. Broke up with my girlfriend, and I had been working at this apartment complex. So this is around 1979, 1980. So it's the end of the 70s, pre-AIDS. And this apartment complex was for singles. And I was the assistant recreation director. You could imagine what that was like.
Oh my God.
Okay, Quaaludes were still being made.
It's like the Love Boat on land.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it was really weird too, because the woman who was like in charge of recreation, she was a born-again Christian. So she's trying to do these semi-wholesome activities, and all anybody there wants to do is take drugs and screw.
It's the 70s.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was really just a circus. So I met this guy there, though, this older guy who did not really, he didn't get the memo, right? Like, it was not his place, but he got it because it was close to where he worked, which was the airport. And he had been a pilot for United, but he'd had a nervous breakdown. And I found out all about this much later. Hold on one second. Let me just do this one thing. Hold on. Okay. Okay. So I befriended this guy because he was really interesting to me. And he was giving me these books. He was giving me like Edgar Cayce stuff. And I found out I thought he was really fascinating. He was older. I'm like, so I was tripping out like with the stuff he would give me. So one day before I got fired from this job, he gave me this book called My Peace. And it was by the Lord himself. I'm like, whoa, thank you. I am clearly not ready for this book. So I put it on my bookshelf. And after I had come back from this weekend, because I was still living at home with my parents and going to school, I had wrecked my car. I'd had a massive kind of, LSD meltdown, thing, and kind of this dark night of the soul. And I don't know what to expect. And my parents were like, so cool. It was like, wow. I didn't tell them about the breakdown. I told them about my car. And it was I thought, wow, this is an interesting moment, because I'm walking into, at that time, what I would call a field of grace.
Yes.
And so then I just said to myself, I think I'm ready for that book.
Oh, wow.
So I pull, a couple days later, I pull this book off my shelf and I start reading it, and it's almost as if the words are coming right off my soul. And as I read this book, my life begins to change in ways I can't even begin to describe. And I could only read maybe 4 or 5 pages at a time because the material was so kind of dense and yet like just pulsating with light. It was like nutrient rich soul food. So as I began to read this book, my life just began to completely change. Like my habits began to change, my diet began to change, my thoughts began to change. I started to have, it was almost as if, like you would understand this from a astrological perspective, like my upper mind opened. It was really profound, and I was beginning to be able to make associations. Right, I was beginning to make these kinds of connections in ways that I'd never made before. It was very interesting. It was like all of a sudden, my third eye, my crown just opened up. Yeah. And then I started to have out of body experiences, and this would be a good segue into like a dream story. Do you want to hear it?
Yes. And on your way into that story, I usually just like to get an idea of how you dream. So the detail, like, a general idea, like black and white, color, audible, all that, your dream landscape in general.
So it over the years it's changed, but mostly color and some audible. And for a very long period of time, I had incredibly dark dreams.
As in like terrors?
Well, I know. I would have some of those later.
Murder, death, kill dreams.
I would have very, very dark psychological dreams.
Okay.
A lot of death, violence. Mm-hmm. Like, very, like I would be working things out in a very intense sort of way in my dream life.
Yeah.
And I would also have, quote unquote, at times light dreams, but mostly because I have Scorpio rising in my 12th house.
Yeah.
Also dominated by Scorpio.
Yeah, of course.
So my dream life tends to be very intense.
Yeah.
But that time I was having, okay, so this goes into so I was studying Hemingway in college, and I had my teacher was a guy by the name of Robin Gajuzek, and Robin's son is the producer for Stranger Things, and Robin's uncle or Robin's brother was a Nobel Prize winner who discovered Kuru disease. He discovered basically mad cow, right?
Oh, wow.
This was it. This was in Borneo. And he was a co-winner of the Nobel Prize. But getting off the track a little bit. But so Robin's brother wound up taking some of these young boys back from Borneo. He adopted I think 12 or 13 of them. And he wound up, he wound up abusing them, sexually abusing them, which is a strange kind of offshoot of these kids and Stranger Things. It's a whole different trip. But, Robin was my Hemingway teacher, and he was an amazing teacher. And we did Hemingway 5 days a week. So I was immersed in Hemingway. And one night I was having this very intense dream. And in the dream, I saw these 2 lions. And then I felt the presence of Ernest Hemingway in my room, and I got clubbed on the head, which I thought was Ernest Hemingway. And it was so visceral that I actually pulled the covers over my head because I didn't want to be hit.
Wow.
And shortly after that, I started to have out of body experiences. Like I would, pop out of my third eye
While awake.
when I slept. And it was really a trip, like it was interesting, but at the same time, it's also very unnerving to have these things. And then I got further into Hemingway, and then I found out that when he was in Spain, he was part of the Red Cross in Spain, he wound up having an out-of-body experience because he got wounded trying to bring these guys off the battlefield because he was Red Cross.
Yes.
So he was wounded, so he had an out-of-body experience, which was one of the reasons why he was an insomniac, because it terrified him so much that he thought if he went to sleep again, he would leave his body. So, I
just watched a Hemingway biography, so this is timely for me.
So I'm convinced that I was initiated into out-of-body experiences and astral travel by Ernest Hemingway.
That's amazing. So when you're this, okay, so can you lay this foundation for us of your difference between dreaming, where it's just your personal filing system, the stuff of the day, and then this lucidity and out of body? Are these distinct layers that you experienced? Is it seamless? The third eye thing, like popping out, is this still something that happens? And how visceral was that? That's
it hasn't happened in a while, because I sleep a lot less.
Okay.
Now I think I sleep maybe 6 hours a night.
Oh.
So it's doesn't happen that much. Sometimes it will happen when I'm really, really, really tired, like really exhausted. I think I probably have too much electronic smog in my place now for it to happen.
Yeah, it seems like everyone does these days.
Yeah, it's messed with my dream life in a lot of ways and sleep in general. But when it would happen, it was very distinct from dreaming. It was very, very distinct. It would be something of another order or another level. And it would generally be accompanied by sleep paralysis. That would be one of the oncoming sorts of states. And then all of a sudden, I would just feel myself just rip through my third eye. And
so were you, when you're in the sleep paralysis state, was there a point? So was that a scary part for you in the beginning, or?
Oh, it was terrifying because I was actually able to see into the, lower astral.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And there are things in the lower astral that, will really get your attention.
Yeah, it's irpy. So then once you were able to write out and you knew that you were going to actually go OBE.
Yeah. I'd have to trust it. And it was not always easy to trust it because I guess in life I'm kind of a control freak, in my own way. But, getting to that point where you could actually let go, and this happened pretty much into my late 30s and into some degree in my early 40s. And I got better at sort of trusting it. And there are other times where it's just like, no, I don't want to do this. I just want to sleep.
So you were able to exert that kind of will where you could choose not to go over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was one time, it was for me the most profound. And this is when I was living in Oakland, and I had like a lot of crazy dreams and really otherworldly stuff happened to me between 32 and around 38. Between 32 and 36, 37, I had Pluto transiting my ascendant in Scorpio.
Oh, okay. I was wondering what must have been going on.
Oh, it was intense. It was like it was like a combination of like Disneyland and hell.
Yeah, well, Pluto is no joke.
Yeah, because some of it was really interesting, Very dark though. I went through a lot of dark material, and I managed an apartment building in Oakland at the edge of the ghetto, and 80% of my tenants were black.
Yeah, I lived in Oakland for a while.
Yeah, so it was, it was both sort of physically, no pun intended, but it was, I was living with people from a, different culture, and, it was very different, and it was cool in a lot of ways, but metaphysically, certainly was very dark.
Yeah.
And,
well, it seems like it served as a catalyst to activate this different layer.
Oh, totally. I was dealing with really primal energies in that place. You wake up, in the middle of the night, you'd hear people, fucking away, and, loud moaning, and, very, very visceral kind of reality. But you'd also hear other stuff that wasn't great. Like I remember one morning waking up, and I could hear very clearly the woman across from me abusing her kid.
Oh man.
It was a heavy environment in a lot of ways, and I learned a lot. But it was also this kind of time where I was having this very powerful psychic exploration. I was really into like dark ambient music.
Yeah.
But one of my,
this goes with Pluto so well.
Oh yeah, I was really into this guy named Jorge Reyes from Mexico, who did this kind of ethno-shamanic music. I actually went to Mexico and hung out with him. And
oh, nice.
Yeah, so it was like a big, psychonavigation, techno shamanism. That was my thing back then. And so I had this one night there, and it was all kind of sort of bunched together. And this is really, it was. So I had this out of body experience. Was sleeping on my couch, and I remember leaving my body and going underneath my couch.
Yes.
And I thought, this is no place to hang out. It's really dusty down here. So at that point, I went back through my body, and I went out through my window, my bay window, and I actually remember moving through glass. It was like moving through water. It was really interesting.
Nice.
And I remember just ascending into the sky, and I was actually really out there, like further than I'd ever been.
Were you in control of this?
Yes, because I was able to get back into my body, but it was very. I mean, I shot off like a skyrocket.
What did you see out there?
Oh, well, certainly I could see the landscape below.
Mm-hmm.
I could see the apartment that I was living in. The stars were incredibly clear and alive. It was like I was a part of them.
Oh, so there was a connection too.
Oh, yeah, totally. And the moon, I think, was full. It was like this massive silver orb. And I'm like, where am I going with this? It's like, how far am I going to get out here? And I kind of freaked out a little bit.
Is that what brought you back in? Yeah,
and I said I've got to get back, because I'm accelerating at a pretty substantial rate, and so I'm and I've never gone this far out before. So I came back into my body, and it was right around. It may have been that night, or it was right around the same time, where I had this really interesting dream, where I was being shown this alien language.
Oh.
And it was like a scroll of this alien language.
What, like glyphs? What did it look like?
It was almost like alien Morse code, like kind of glyphy. Yeah.
Okay.
And I could read every single line, like I knew every single line. And there was this other kind of piece of the dream where I was a part of this round table. And in the round table, I was actually kind of young. I mean, I was in my life at that time right around 35, but in the dream, I couldn't have been more than 10 years old or 11.
That's
It was very strange. And I was around this round table, and this group of people, it was like, we were like some version of, the Justice League on an astral level. And it was like the last time we were meeting together, and this guy who was sort of the focal point or the leader, he had like king-like energy in some ways. And he said, this is the last time we'll be meeting together. Look around one another and sort of take this all in. And I thought, well, this is all very interesting. But what came to me through this whole thing with the alien code was that at around the age of 9, during my sleep, I was part of a group of souls that would get together and we would do these actions all over the planet. And at that time, what they said in the dream was that even though I was 9, I was roughly around 42 years old in sort of my kind of evolutionary state. It was odd because when I was young, I felt really way older than my years, like way older. Like when I was 9, like when I was 10 years old, I was reading Ball 4 by Jim Bouton.
Yeah, I was similar.
So I was, so I could relate to this. And what came to me was that, because I was 9 years old or 10 years old, I would get a lot of sleep, right? So during these states, I would be very active. It was almost like taking advantage of this 10-hour time zone where I could do other things, or 10-hour time frame. So the alien code were these actions that we did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So one of them was when I was 9, we directed our energy to an ocean liner or a tanker that was crossing the Atlantic. And there was a breach in the hull of the boat. And so we actually came together energetically to, help the molecules kind of cohere.
Oh, this is remarkable.
So the boat could make this journey. And then the next line of code was something similar, but it was like there was a rupture in the, I guess you would call it the energy field of the planet, or the kind of the embryo of the planet. And there was this kind of alien energy that was interpenetrating the planet. And so we went there to take care of that and deal with that. And I was just loving reading these codes. And all of a sudden, this woman who I was dating at the time, for some reason, decided to call me up at 1:30 in the morning. And so the dream ended.
Oh, wow.
But it was really, really quite powerful. And it made a lot of sense to me. It's like, wow, that was cool. So that was a big dream for me.
So would you call that a dream or a lucid dream or astral activity?
Yeah, I don't know it. It was not your typical dream.
Right. It sounds like you were very lucid, at least.
Yeah, I was pretty lucid. Like I was actually able to, read the code, and it was interesting. I'll tell you another dream if you're into it, if you're open to it.
Oh yes, please.
Okay.
We love.
So this was kind of liminal period of my life. Like I got married when I was 29, and I got divorced.
How sad in return of you.
Yeah, but it didn't work out. It did not work out for a number of reasons, and so we broke up pretty early. And so I wound up kind of bouncing around the Pacific Northwest for roughly a summer. I was trying to figure out where I was going to live, and nothing was really working out too well. But I was starting to have these really strange experiences with my name, which legal, my government name is Robert Morris, and my sort of fictitious or nom de plume is Robert Phoenix.
We refer to that as your slave name.
Yeah.
Morris.
Yeah. So I call it the government name, right? So I was seeing my name everywhere, the Robert Morris name everywhere. It was weird, and I started to have these weird kinds of synchronicities with Philadelphia. I was reading this book called The Miracle of Philadelphia, all about the Constitution. And one of the signers of the Constitution was Robert Morris. And I remember looking for a place to live in Seattle that summer, and I knocked on this door, and I was asking about, room in the house, and somebody had taken it, and I was talking to the woman in the house. I said, I really like this area. It's right across from this baseball field. What's the name of the baseball field? She says, oh, that's Bobby Morris Playfield. I'm like, oh. And then I went to Portland to see if I could find a place, and I answered an ad in the Oregonian or whatever, whatever the newspaper.
That's the Oregonian.
So I went for an interview at this house, and it was on Morris Avenue in Portland.
Oh wow!
And then I tried to get a summer gig ushering at Cirque du Soleil in San Francisco, and the guy who was in charge of ushering, he was Canadian, and his name was Robert Morris, right? The Canadian version.
Oh, wow, the synchronicities.
Yeah, so I'm like, what is going on here with this name thing? It's weird. So I wound up going to Olympia, Washington for Labor Day because my ex-wife, she wasn't my ex-wife yet. She was close to being the ex-wife. She was flying into Olympia from Hawaii to bake for this wedding. So I'm like, I just got a hair up my butt, and I'm going to drive from the Bay Area to Olympia, Washington on a Friday night. So I got in my car. I had 2 cats at the time, a kitten and a dog, and the kitten's mom. So I drove from Vallejo to Olympia, and I'm driving through the night. And, I still love doing stuff like that, just get in the car and drive. And so the next morning, I think I stopped in Lake Oswego, slept. I started calling my friend who lived in Olympia, and he wasn't answering, but he always told me, hey, if I'm not here, here's the key, just let yourself in. So I keep phoning him, he's not there. I let myself in. I'm staying there for about 3 or 4 days. Labor Day comes, my ex-wife shows up, we have a great time. And I find out that the guy who's living there is in a coma. And I'm like, wow. So, okay, what do you want me to do? Well, can you stay here, watch his cats? You can hang out here for a while. I'm like, okay, fine. I was supposed to go back to California. It didn't work out. Now all of a sudden I find myself in Olympia, Washington at this guy's place, just outside of Olympia, Scott Lake. And I start to have the most mind-blowing dreams in this place. And I have this one dream where I find my dead body.
Oh my.
And I pick up my dead body and I take it to the Vatican.
Oh.
And I hand it to these nuns. And I said, here, can you give this to the Pope?
Oh, wow.
And they're like, okay. And then I found my dead body again. It's like I found it twice. And then the second time I just put it in the dumpster. So I did 2 different things with my dead body.
Was all the loot there still from the first one?
What's that?
Was all the loot still there from the first one?
Yeah, I don't. Well, this is interesting that you bring this up, because the next day I got up and I was like feeling very strange, but I hadn't paid my credit card in about 2 months. So I get on the phone and I call my credit card company and I give them all my information, and they said, oh, Robert Morris? I said, yes. And this is your last address? And I said, yes. I said, well, our records show that you're deceased and your account has been terminated.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I nearly dropped the phone. This is the morning after I have this I'm dead dream.
Oh, that's astounding.
And so part of me was like freaked out, and the other part of me was like really happy.
Yeah,
that
of
was
course.
the second death was your straw man.
Yeah. So they said, well, if you want to clear this up, you're going to have to send us a letter. And I'm like, yeah, right.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Oh, don't worry. I'll take care of that right away. So the dreaming stuff in this place near Olympia just outside of Olympia, got really interesting. And not long after that, I had this dream where I stepped through like this wall of plasma. And on the other side of this wall of plasma, I knew everything about another life that I was living. It was like I knew all the details intimately. Wow. It was weird.
And was this lucid? Or,
oh, yeah, very lucid. So very lucid. And it was just for, a few moments. And then I walked back through that wall of plasma and came back into, my sleep dream.
What did the wall of plasma look like, if I may?
Running a current.
Oh, God.
It was like a Slovene river.
Did it have a color?
It was clear.
Wow.
Opaque. But a little cloudy. It was sort of like a shower door that's a little frosted. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
That's what it was like. So I was very interested in this experience. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I went to go see this psychic in Seattle because I wanted some kind of clarity on it.
And this is before you were actually working as a psychic?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So she said, well, you have 2 alternate lives currently. She said one of them is a small girl living in the Midwest, and she comes from a very poor family. The other is an older man living in Philadelphia. And he's near the end of his life. So this is the same summer all this Philadelphia stuff is going on.
Oh, my.
And by the way, I had always been totally into time travel. Like, that's been my thing, throughout my life, time travel.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry if you hear, I have a howling dog.
That's okay.
I actually typed into chat before that you were time traveling in your dreams to when you're 42.
So you're kind of onto something, right? I mean, so I was very into time travel. So I get this thing with this woman. I was very into the Philadelphia experiment, this whole, and when in my 30s, so I filed all this away, right? Just filed it away. Really interesting. In my 30s, I started to get into Peter Moon's books. Have you guys read those?
Can you give me a title?
I haven't, but he writes about Montauk and stuff.
Synchronicity, the Montauk experiment.
Oh, yes. No, I haven't read them. I do know.
He's the one who came up with the idea of the loop between 83 and 63 and 43.
Oh, well, that was like Preston Nichols and those guys.
Yeah, well, Moon worked with them for a while.
Yes.
I think Peter Moon still works with Preston Nichols.
He's a Facebook friend. He corrected me on something today on Facebook.
Preston? Or?
I don't know him, but he corrected me on something.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's okay.
He's a Facebook friend.
But I really got into his Montauk books. And so we fast forward, it's summer 96, and I started to do a lot of tarot reading. This is after I did the phone psychic stuff and everything. And so I'm traveling around the country doing tarot reading. I got my van, I got my dog. I'm really restless, so I'm going to go, read tarot cards across America, which I did. I wound up in this campground in Santa Fe. And I think it's I think it's August 13th. It's the key day for.
I think it's the 12th.
And so I'm rereading Adventures in Synchronicity, and then I realize the day that I'm reading about is that day, right? It's actually happening in August.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting, right? I'm reading about this on the day. So I run out of money, and I just had enough to fill up my gas tank. So I decided to get out of Santa Fe, and I wound up going to Taos. I drove to Taos. kind of a little bookstore gallery thing. And she sort of took a liking to me. And I think I showed up in.
Was it Sybil Dunbar?
What's that?
Was it Sybil Dunbar?
No, it was this woman. She was really interesting. She'd been a high-ranking executive for Disney, and she wound up getting abducted and kidnapped in Disneyland by somebody.
Wow.
And was held hostage. It was kind of a big deal.
That is a big deal.
And she managed to talk her way out of this thing, and then she left Disney, and she eventually wound up in Taos, and she had this gallery, but it wasn't working. They had a drought in Taos, and a bad winter was really, just throttling her. But she and I connected. We had a nice friendship, and she said that I could read tarot cards in her gallery. But on this Monday night, she hired this woman to come in and read the Akashic records. So she said, "You're my guest. You can come in and hang out." And I think I was the last person to get my question answered. So I told her about this thing with the Philadelphia experiment and this day in August and reading about it and it being the day. And she said, "Well, I'll tell you why this is meaningful to you, because you were there. You were part of the Philadelphia experiment, and you have an alternate life you're an older man, and you're about ready to pass on in Philadelphia.
So again,
by the way, you have another life, and it's a young girl living in the Midwest. This is 6 years apart from when I had that first experience, psychic in Seattle.
That's just mind blowing.
You could be another Al Bielek.
I freaked out. Okay, I totally freaked out when I heard this.
So this was around 1996?
96, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of mind-blowing. And it actually made sense that, I was actually there, part of the experiment. She had a different take on it, though. She didn't think people time traveled. She thought that it was more of a...
Like parallel?
More of a kind of a mass hypnosis. That's what her take was.
And so this ties into that wall we're talking about in the dream. Were you able to... So in the dream you were thinking it was past lives, but it could have been contemporary simultaneous.
Yeah, no, the dream is a parallel life. Like when I went through the current of plasma, it wasn't past. I knew I was living.
Okay, it was current. All right.
Yes, I was living out something else in some kind of alternate life.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of a mind blower for sure. And
those other lives were in this same dimension, same realm. Like you could go visit those people. Yeah.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah, cool.
If I knew who they were, I think that the guy in Philadelphia, he's gone. What's really interesting is, like, for a long time, I had a real issue with money. And I almost had like this, it's kind of cliche to say, but like this poverty consciousness. And and I wonder if it had to do with this alternate life that I was living with this young girl who was growing up in probably less than ideal circumstances. I wonder if that was like kind of reaching into, my reality in some ways. You
would think that it would. There's a symbiotic, there has to be some sort of symbiosis going on.
I think so, particularly because I was so interested in time travel as well.
But you guys must share some kind of DNA, right? I mean, in order for that to happen, you'd think there'd be some kind of DNA sharing at some point. I would.
Could be. I mean, it could be. Or maybe what we perceive as reality is just, a lot more strange than, we can wrap our heads around.
Well, that's what we're all about. What do you think would happen? Is it, so say you you encounter the girl who's still alive, is this some sort of, does it create some sort of, not a sci-fi paradox, but some sort of paradox where you would, if you're vibrating at the same rate because you're actually the same soul consciousness or whatever you want to call that.
I would think it more of a completion than a antimatter matter thing.
Right. And I'm trying to get away from that. Is like that, trying to find a word that brings that same kind of feeling as a paradox where two things vibrating at the same rate meet each other.
It would be an interesting journey, and it could make for, if it was done right, it could make for an interesting movie plot.
What do you think? You already said you have the deja vu. So what do you think deja vus are? Your thoughts?
My experience was that I had been to those events in the future already.
And so it's not tied into anything else, like a dream, or you've already been there, but you're here.
Yeah, because time is really fluid, right? So based on probabilities. And I think the probabilities when you're younger are more finite in some ways. And meaning they're kind of, in terms of like sort of, control sort of factors, I think they're more finite. And I think as you get older, I think those kind of go away. I could be wrong, but there's way more variables. That's just my sense. But it was that's because I would ask myself, why does this happen? And it happened frequently and strongly. And the only thing I could come up with is that I've already been here, because I would know what was going to happen.
Right. That's part of that experience.
Yeah.
If you're tuned into it, I find. So this elder gentleman that is you also, who is probably passed now, what happens with the part of you that was animating him, whatever your essence is?
So what I was told by sort of the first psychic in Seattle was that he was sort of he was sort of the lead in some ways. And then when he would pass, it would move on to me. Like, I would be sort of the focal point now for the two other lives until I would leave. But I don't know what would have happened to me. Who knows?
So in that kind of, taking that further, do you think it's possible that there's been another fragment then? Is this a chain kind of thing?
It could be. I mean, I think anything is possible.
Yeah, of course. But since these experiences are so solid, and then you have these two separate psychics honing in on the same thing in conjunction with that dream, I felt, I had to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I remember clearly during the 80s and into the 90s that there was almost like this really sort of fecund psychic field that was everywhere. Like I ran across really profound psychics. I ran across really profound channels. And I don't know if that kind of reality exists anymore. It certainly doesn't exist for me.
No, things have changed. Sure.
So can you relate to that?
Yes, and it's a subject we talk about a lot often. There's definitely been a change, and I think a lot of us are trying to figure out what the change was or is.
And how about even since the eclipse too?
Right. Well, now we're dealing with all this other stuff right now, contemporary, because as you said, Robert, and I can't remember which one, but the before eclipse and after eclipse stuff, which is profound. We turned a corner.
Oh, we're in a different place now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should save that for the after.
That's for after. So yeah, I don't know how we are in time, Jerry.
We are at 1 hour and 20. We're time for questions. We're coming up on it.
Okay, so let me just get in a couple of these last things for a Nox Mente show. So so ultimately, so we start with the world you grew up in, and we move into your dream symbols and dream landscape and into varied states of consciousness. And I want to know, what do you feel or think about the state of death in conjunction with the state of memory, the state of dreaming, the state of out of body? How does that tie into any of this?
Yes, I think so. The state of death it's interesting. You know, I this weekend I went to a memorial this weekend, and it was a contemporary friend, not a friend, but somebody, an acquaintance that I coached, sort of not with, but you know, we managed teams in the same league for a couple of years. So I went to his memorial on Saturday, which was, I found myself tearing up and crying, and I heard all these great stories, and I said to myself, man, I should have hung out with this guy more. He sounded like a really good guy. And then right around the same time, it was the same Saturday actually, Kevin McMahon. Do you guys know Kevin McMahon at all?
The name is familiar. Jerry?
Kevin is
No,
one, you know, he was one of these kind of synchronistic navigators, and he used Google Earth, and he was brilliant at aligning from one point to another. And you know, like if you draw this line from this obelisk in Vatican City, and you draw it straight across to Las Vegas, and you know, he would do stuff like that. But it was so similar.
This is who
What's
passed?
that? Kevin passed away last Saturday.
Okay.
And so, he's got his magnum opus on YouTube with JFK and 9/11. But
that's how I know his name. I do know who he is.
Yeah. So I had Kevin on my show. He's a really, really sweet guy, and so both him and Stan passed, and they're both Scottish, McMahon and McDonald. You know, I thought this is unusual, you know. And so I've actually been thinking a lot about death. And I'd actually been thinking of, about death before then too. Because I've got my progressed ascendant is Capricorn. And I've had Pluto on my progressed ascendant now for the last 3 or 4 years. So I've been living with this intense kind of Plutonian energy.
Oh yeah.
And I may have had a much closer encounter with death when I was 18 months old, and I had spinal meningitis, but it's not consciously with me. But I would assume that these things that I've experienced along the way, just like other things that people have experienced along the way, I would assume that they become much more manifold in death, since we're not dealing with, the gravity of, this dimension. So I would assume that, based on one's consciousness, that there could be a number of different things that an individual could access in a fairly unique way, and that the sort of the glimpses and the glimmers and the shards and the fragments of these alternate realities would become much more evident. But at the same time, I think we've all been going through this kind of interesting relationship with our ideas of what the afterlife is. And there have been, what was that guy? Illuminati Matrix. What was his name?
Wilson? Anton Wilson?
No, it'll come to me. So one of the things that was really popping when this guy's website was was cooking, was this whole idea that death is a trap, right? And that we wind up getting recycled and we wind up coming back here. And this whole thing with going to the light and all that stuff is just a complete ploy by the archonic entities that rule over the Gnostic domain. So that if you really want to escape this thing, you go as far away from the light as possible, right? So I think there's been some really interesting kind of developments around death. And in fact, I think there's this spiritual movement now where people are committing suicide because they're consciously ending or breaking. Have you heard about this?
Yes. Well,
I just saw a movie about this where they get proof of the afterlife and people start killing themselves, like 4 million people in a day kind of thing.
So it's kind of this new phenomenon where they're like, screw it, this life is hell. The myths about going to hell after you commit suicide are nothing more than things to keep you from actually pulling the ripcord on this place. I don't know where I stand on that, but clearly we're having a major shift in our relationship with what we perceive the afterlife to be.
Well, what do you think? So I guess maybe winding this round, what is this that we have right now? Like, if we can be lucid in dreams and be this conscious, and then of course memories are no different, but they're no less tangible than a dream, and are no more. And so what about this state right now? As soon as this is over, it's hard, aside from this video, what do we have to show for it? This is transient as well.
Oh,
we don't even have the video. I'm not recording it.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to get your.
No, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. It's and it all happens. So I mean, now we're in the realm of cliche, but it all happens so quickly. I was with my son tonight, and we drove past his elementary school. And I said, do you remember when you first came here? What grade were you in? He said it was 3rd grade. And I said, well, what grade are you in now? He says, I'm in the 8th grade. I said, it was 5 years ago. So you realize how fast that went? And I said, in 5 years, you'll be 18. And trust me, it'll go by in the blink of an eye. And everything is incredibly transient. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm 57, but it sure feels like that time is just ripping by now.
It does feel like it's speeding up to me as well. I'm not in my 50s, so there does seem to be some sort of shift. But I've wondered, maybe is there some astrology behind that even? I don't know, or some, the harmonic convergence, something that we can latch onto even.
It felt to me like after the harmonic convergence, we were living in a post-historical time. And that's when I really felt like things were speeding up. And you can even hear it in "It's the End of the World as We Know It" by REM.
Yes.
That song just completely captures that zeitgeist.
It really does encapsulate that perfectly.
Lenny Bruce is not afraid.
Yeah. So post 2012, where we, because something happened in 2012, even though, the world, didn't theoretically end, something changed in 2012. And we're living in yet kind of another sort of post-historical era. That's right around 2012 is when a lot of the false flaggy stuff starts to happen.
Yes, absolutely. 2012 was a gateway, and it definitely happened. People want things to be like sci-fi or boom boom in your face, and I felt on an energetic level things changed.
Yeah, they definitely changed. Now we're on the backside of this eclipse. And, we're living in bizarro land now.
It is upside down world. It's all it seems really so inverse in a way.
Yeah. What's really interesting is, people say that, well, this is part of the program where everything is inverse, right? That, pretty is ugly, good is bad, all these kinds of inversions. And that's part of this program. But I read something from this so-called insider, and basically what the insider was saying was that you have it completely wrong. It's not about things being inversed, but it's about reality being shaped to the way that we want to shape it on a consensus level, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. The inversion piece is only kind of a sort of a
filter,
elementary modification.
Yes.
That it's not just upside down, but inside out, sideways, over, under, sideways, down. This is the the universe or the model that we're moving towards. And and the challenge with that is that people that are born, I would say, probably pre-1980, don't have the same kind of historical reference points. So we've had I don't know how old you two are, but we kind of grew up in this kind of cyclical, linear sort of time thing, where there was like the evolution of rock and roll. You could see it, right? Instruments got better, amps got better, recording equipment got better.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a moment. I'm a Gen Xer, so I've definitely seen a progression happen, and then this sort of entropy or whatever we're in now.
So the reference points they're just disappearing completely. I mean, from a landscape perspective, right? They're removing statues. I mean, that's a really mundane reference point, but they're removing statues.
It's amazing.
And I think the gap between the time of removal and the time of putting it up is going to get shorter and shorter, because it seems like the system is trying to make us forget as much as our history as possible, or our past, so it can shape the future more to its liking.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and look at something as mundane as Leave It to Beaver. Like, you won't,
that does not exist.
Yeah, it'll be rare to see Leave It to Beaver in the future.
That's alien now.
Well, that whole 50s atomic family model has been destroyed. That's why.
It's been atomized.
Definitely. We got a question, though.
Yes, so we're going to wrap up the Nox Mente section of this with questions, and then we'll move into the after show where we're not live.
All right, so Kilendal has a question. Thank you for joining us tonight, Kilendal. Robert, have you ever woken up from a dream and felt like literally fell into his bed, your bed? So have you ever woken up and fell into your bed from a dream? Like that feeling?
Yes, I've had that feeling.
And if so, were you flying right before you woke up?
I think I was, actually, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Sure, he'll be happy with that. No more questions. Do you
That's
think
it? That's the only question?
Wow, John Wolf has no questions.
I'm surprised. Someone asked if we're going to get raptured into spacecrafts of the Anunnaki. No, that's not really a question. When the Bureau flies by,
I have no interest in getting into a spacecraft.
I hope you do either. I said if we did, you get eaten if you do.
All right. I used to want
a spacecraft.
But I don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
it's funny how it shifted. It looks like there's a question in there now.
John asked one earlier when.
John, can you just repeat it for us?
He says the change is CERN. That's the only thing of his. Oh, wait.
CERN. Yeah, we got to factor CERN in for sure.
A lot of John's think. Yeah, there's no questions I see, John. I'm
big
sorry.
is the
Do you
self?
channel
It's a
Ernest
psychological-
Hemingway?
Do I channel Hemingway?
Mm-hmm.
I've had people like this one guy. He emailed me a long time ago, and he told me that he had a dream about me and Ernest Hemingway. And this was just somebody who was a reader of my website. And it had something to do with an apartment and me. It was very unusual. So people have had these connections with me and Hemingway. I don't know if I channel Hemingway, but there's some odd thing there. And most of his books, original manuscripts, are here at the University of Texas. So are Crowley. There's a lot of Crowley's works at the University of Texas.
That's a nice synchronicity.
They also have the Gutenberg Bible there.
Oh, that changed everything.
All right. Okay, here's John. Excuse me. Here's John's question. Question of the day is: how big is the self?
How big is the self?
That's what.
Well, it depends on how many drinks I've had. If I've had a few drinks, the self gets very big.
All right.
I can see why he asked that, though. It's a great psychological question, especially with my dogs are going crazy upstairs with the bilocation.
Yeah, true. Right, because we were talking about the soul splitting aspect.
I think the self is an illusion, to be honest with you.
As do I.
A virtual container.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing of identification, and we're here to identify, and we're here to move through the ego because it brings us experiences. But ultimately, it's just a construct, really.
All right. Last question here from John. Do you think dreams are real experiences?
I think they can be. I think that there are higher and lower orders and levels of dreaming. And I think some dreams are very real, and some dreams are just, you're just flushing out the garbage sometimes.
Yeah, the filing system. In the after show, I do want to ask you about the lower astral. I was waiting to do that later out of the show.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to. All right. Well, that's it for tonight's show. Oh, wait. We got one more. We have a follow-up now from John. Damn you, John.
One more and done.
What is beyond the self?
What is beyond the self? Infinite self? I mean...
Would you consider that the collective consciousness?
Well, yeah. I mean, ideally, when I think of the self on that level, I think of like Leaves of Grass by Whitman, right? Where, he travels into this leaf of grass and he becomes everything. He's, partaking of the earth and the sky and all. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest pieces of literature in the English language. And the thing about it that's really fascinating, and of course, he, would come through a Gemini because he's a Gemini, is that, it comes out of this whole period of, where he has the songs of myself, right? And in the songs of myself is Leaves of Grass. So Whitman is very clear of some level of identification with this personal narrative that is actually writing these poems. But through that, he expands into this kind of mystical domain where he's everything. But through that, there's not a diminution of self. There's like this kind of very expansive and macro realization of what self is. So what's beyond self is, I think, that kind of experience where you can be this, but you could also, be an atom inside of a piece of plaster inside of the wall of this apartment, or, and done in such a way where the imagination is sort of the carrier wave of all of that. William Blake talks about this as well. And so I think what's beyond self is this kind of representation of what it's like in some ways to be God. Because if you take this idea of God as this entity, not a demiurge, but this massive super intelligence that actually has like this core of love and this desire to experience novelty, that it can experience everything, but at the same time also experiences itself. And I think ultimately that's kind of that's the trip, right? That is the trip where you can't have all of that and at the same time still retain this kind of, Martin Buber talks about like the thou relationship between living beings and even to some extent non-living beings. And then he talks about the I-thou relationship, which is almost like I-it versus I. And so when you're in thou, you can have that kind of that shared experience, but also come back. I don't know if we can live like that every single day, and maybe at some point in the future, after all this electronic stuff is wiped out, and we get to kind of revert back to analog life forms, we might have a better chance at it. But I think bringing it back, what's beyond self is the capacity to experience a multitude of things simultaneously and at the same time have kind of a self-referential point. That's my take on it.
That's
John
that's awesome.
said that was a very excellent answer. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah,
So thank you,
really.
Robert.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, that's
Thank you, Robert, for joining us.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm glad we could get it together. And Jerry, it's been great to connect with you.
Likewise.
Time. And Nish, I hope to see your face someday. But it's been a pleasure meeting you and connecting.
Yes. Yes.
I hope
Thank
to see
you,
your
everyone.
face too. Thank you, everyone in chat. Thank you for watching and listening. And sorry for the long delay tonight. And we'll see you next week when we welcome CW Chanter. I'm sure you're all excited about that, as we are. We just triggered greatest potential on CW Chanter. All right, guys. Have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye.